It's exactly 30 minutes past 9. Still watching SmartNames Business and Manchester region this morning. Of course, with Joran Holson. Of course, apologies for that. A few technicalities that were involved in there. And but of course, we're here to drive your business. But before we proceed into any other related discussions, don't forget today is a Thursday, so the markets on the Zambia platform are still ongoing. Now, for you to be a part of this, it's quite very simple. You just there *92# which is the USSD code, which will enable you to have access to these markets. You will be able to buy bonds and securities for just 15,000 Ugandan shillings. Now the markets will be opening at 8:15 a.m. running all the way to 3:15 p.m. West African time. And this is going to be effective Monday up to Friday. It's effective Monday up to Friday, apart from the weekends and the public holidays when these markets cannot be accessed. But despite the fact you have the rest of the days to capitalize and make yourself quite some huge profits for you. And this week, the rest of public holiday, so the markets have been running full. So we still have today and tomorrow for you to be a part of this. Zab will make this a reality. There is no paperwork involved. All you need is a mobile phone, whether it's a button phone, whether it's a smartphone. Well, you'll be in position to buy this bond securities. Zab says my money, my future, and all that East Africa tells us do something new. It's 2023. Well, of course, right about now, as we head into what's happening onto the East African bloc, of course, there is something to do with the Iran-Africa tour, as Kenya and Iran strengthened bilateral ties. Of course, we have the president arrive. Of course, today we'll be heading towards Zimbabwe, and of course, he will be returning back to Iran. It's what we call the African tour, as part of the ways to to reduce on the isolation that has been ongoing onto the nation following the 2018 sanctions during Donald Trump's regime. Now, Kenya's President William Ruto and Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi have signed a number of trade agreements during a visit that is by Iran to the East African country on Wednesday. Now, the two leaders pledged to strengthen bilateral ties, with Raisi describing his visit to Kenya as a turning point in the development of relations between the two countries. Now, the 5 memorandum of understanding signed on Wednesday focus on cooperation in information communication, technology, there is fisheries, animal health, livestock products, and investment promotion. Of course, Ruto told the reporters. Now, Iran also plans to set up a motor vehicle assembly plant in Mombasa County, according to Ruto. Now, the visit is the start of a 3-day tour of Africa by Raisi. That is from Kenya, and he will head to Uganda later on Wednesday before finishing his trip in Zimbabwe on Thursday. Now, of course, prior to the trip, Iranian foreign spokesperson Nasser Kanani expressed optimism that the 3-day trip to Africa could help bolster economic and trade ties with African countries. And Iran is currently seeking to shore up diplomatic support. That is in an effort to ease its international isolation. Kanani said on Monday that Iran and African continent share common political views without elaborating further. Now, the trip is the first by an Iranian leader to the continent in 11 years. And of course, the last leader to visit was Mohammed. That is way back in 2013, and it's been 11 years ever since an Iranian president stepped onto the African soil.
Of course, when you look at most of these particular countries, especially those from the Middle East and the others from the Eastern Bloc, most of them are continuing to at least create these particular relations and strengthen ties amongst them and African countries. And of course, we've come to realize that at times it is something that is very, very helpful to the development of African countries. And I think with Kenya and Iran strengthening the ties, it is the same kind of situation when you realize that the Iran president is actually on the continent making these particular visits. Yesterday as well went on to meet the president of Uganda. So lots of things are happening really in regards to African countries and the Eastern Bloc countries to make sure that they strengthen their ties. But still with the Karibu East African kind of situation, eyes now turn to Tanzania, where the Bank of Tanzania has issued a license to new payment service firm. Now, this payment service firm is the DPO Pay, and of course, this is actually a digital African provider or an African digital payments provider. It's to operate as a payment service provider in Tanzania And as well, the company revealed these details on Tuesday. Now, DPO is registered locally under One Payment Tanzania Limited. The company has been licensed in line with the National Payment Systems Act 2015, which requires all payment subscribers, which requires all payment service providers to undergo a rigorous license application process, which is likely to provide payment services in Tanzania. Now, DPO Pay Managing Director Judy Waruyuru said that the license highlights the firm's commitment to compliance and regulatory standards. Now, DPO Pay says it has been operating successfully throughout Africa since 2006 and was recently acquired by Network International, a leading enabler of digital commerce across the Middle East and Africa region. Now, besides that, it has worked closely with regulators across the continent to obtain new licenses, as requirements vary in each country to ensure secure and uninterrupted services for its merchants and partners. Now, DPO Pay has gained significant recognition and trust among prestigious businesses in various industries, which includes hotels and resorts in Arusha, Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar, where it has extensive experience in the travel tourism sector. Now, the company's statement said that they had established itself as the preferred payment solution for major merchants in the region, including industries such as airlines, hotels, online retailers and logistic companies, with a firm focus on expanding its network. Now, DPO Pay continues to seek collaboration with top-tier businesses and brands, and on the long run, cater to diverse needs of merchants across various industries. And the company's robust security systems ensures that merchants and consumers can transact with confidence, safeguarding their sensitive information and maintaining the highest standards of integrity. In the long run, it has developed integrated payments technology, which will support businesses of all sizes in over 20 countries and accept payments securely and swiftly in multiple currencies. So you get to realize that at least African governments, once more, and from the East African perspective, they are trying to at least idealize the kind of situation that digital payment systems are the way to go, and DPO Pay is one that has initially gotten license from the Bank of Tanzania.
All right, that is it from the Caribbean, East Africa, and of course, right about now, let's switch our eyes and take a look. Maybe, if just in case you joined us, just to recap, of course, looking at the Iran-Africa tour as Kenya and Iran strengthened bilateral ties, and of course, coming in down to the Bank of Tanzania to license, issues license to new payment service firm, and of course, the Bank of Tanzania permits an African digital payments provider, that is the DPO Pay. Of course, taking a look at the digital transitions onto the East African community. And now let's switch our eyes and take a look at what's happening onto the international scene. Now, of course, Egypt kicks starting off here as, of course, the nation announces deals to boost, that is the private sector within that country. Now, of course, the Egyptian government announced on Tuesday that it had signed a number of deals to sell off, that is $1.9 billion of worth of stakes in state-owned companies. Now, of course, among the sales in the country's large state-owned communications company, of course, is Telecom Egypt. Now, of course, this is a statement that came in straightforward from the officials, where they say that we announced today that we have been achieving contracts, that is with the private sector, which will be announced by the Minister of Planning, and in total about $1.9 billion US dollars. Now, those American dollars. Now, in total, as the minister will announce, as a country will be receiving that from a few companies. Now, of course, from that number, they received about $1.65 billion. That is with a reminder of $250 million that will get in Egyptian pounds, definitely. And of course, now they've also actually received them, and part of them are the communications company, and some of these companies that the minister will talk about, of course, said the Egyptian Prime Minister in matters of that. Now, the move is part of a major privatization reform to sell stakes in at least 32 state-owned companies, that is from petrochemical farms to major banks. That is in a bid to downsize Egypt's public sector. And yes, now of course the plan was unveiled in January and is part of the $3 billion bailout package that Egypt secured for the International Monetary Fund in December to help the cash-strapped North African economy wither from recent shocks, that is to the global economy, including the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, of course, Egypt, part of those North African countries that are, taking deliberate steps, of course, to, boost the private sector. Despite the fact that we know that Egypt has been predominantly a Western-based country when it comes to ideologies of capitalism, because we all know that it was actually a British colony in that sort of a sense. But of course, there has been a little bit of a decline into the private sector, despite the fact that the nation's economy is actually not badly off. It's actually one of the top economies talking about Africa. But of course, the only hint that has been missing in there was the aspect of the private sector, and we believe once that is sorted out, well, it will be non-stoppable in there.
Well, something surprising, by the way, when it comes to how Egypt is actually, pushing for the private sector to at least boost the economy. And briefly looking at the fact that when you look at the importance of public-private partnerships in regards to these kind of situations, most of the African countries are actually pushing for the PPPs now, and the reason being that most of the money is in the private sector. And at times when the private sector is actually driving the capitalistic economy, you get to realize that at least you need to give them that particular feel of understanding the fact that, well, if I'm into the private sector, this and this is bound to happen.
Definitely.
Or these are the deals I'm supposed to be able to execute. If at all I'm having a wonderful working relation with the government. And I think this is what you could easily see what Egypt is doing. And of course, their economy has not also been performing so well. So it's something that is, it is actually something that is being worked upon here. And it's very surprising that despite the fact that the nation has a little bit, despite the weakness in the private sector, it's been the top five. I'm talking about the top 5 economies in Africa. In also many aspects of life, industrialization. They do oil and gas. I think the major competitor they had way back then was Libya before the fall of Gaddafi. But of course, all that. But you can still see they have been trying to prevail, having a strong support. And you see they had lots of instabilities, change of governments here and there, and all that had some sorts of long-term effects till of recent now when they're trying to really put things all back right. And well, of course, as well, when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine, contributing greatly to some of these particular hindrances and, of course, growth to various economies. But besides that, India has hit online gaming with 28% overtax. And the concerns have mounted over possible addiction and financial losses for players, even as the sector is drawing quite a number of investors. Now, India's government says it will impose a 28% tax on funds that online gaming companies collect from their customers in what is believed to be a setback to the 1.5 billion industry. Now, the gaming apps are often endorsed by sporting heroes in India, where cricket is a national passion, and the concerns have also mounted over possible addiction and the financial losses among the gamers in this particular sector. Now, the sector has been growing at an annual compounded rate of 28% to 30% and has also drawn international investors. United States investment firm Tiger Global has backed Indian gaming startup Dream 11, the lead sponsor of India's national cricket team. And on Tuesday, Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, who chairs the Goods and Services Tax Council, met state ministers and also said that the decision to tax online gaming was reached after extensive discussions. Now, furthermore, industry executives say they may have to pass on the additional cost to their customers by raising the prices of games. In fantasy cricket games on Dream 11, users create their teams by paying as little as 8 rupees, that is approximately 10 US cents, with a total prize pool of 1.2 million rupees, approximately $14,565. Until now, the companies paid a small tax on the fees they charge for offering real money games, and the change, which was announced on Tuesday, will impose a 28% tax on the entire amount collected from players in every game. Now, the revenue of fantasy playing platforms during the popular Indian Premier League, which is the cricket league, as well as for the cricket matches, rose, if you're to look at this season, which ended on May 29th, by 24% from last year to more than 342 million, with over 61 million users participating. Now, Reed's consultancy said this in particular at the start of the month. Of course, now the Indian government, which is actually trying to curb the addiction when it comes to gambling or games, gambling and sports betting, is literally using a tax waiver as a solution to addiction, and of course to curb financial losses, where especially the young people who are actually getting into the betting kind of situation to avoid, over getting addicted to betting and gaming.
It's quite interesting when the concern is really mounting here is about addiction. In Uganda, the Lotteries Act was passed, and I think the tax from 20% to 30%. But surprisingly, for Uganda's aim is to raise revenue. Here it's controlling addiction. So you can see priorities in here, out there. But of course, I think we need to also understand what are the challenges that comes when people get addicted to betting as a result of that. Always say that let them bet more and we tax them and they get money. So which is the best way? You can see how different governments can have an approach on a certain matter. How they think about it is not the same as a result of that. But which is better? You weigh money or reduce addiction? All right. Now, as we sum this up, let's take a look at Apple, which is set to change its pricing system. That is in Africa. Now, this is for markets in Nigeria, Tanzania, and Egypt. Now, on July 25th, 2023, Apple will begin introducing a change in pricing. That is pricing only in-app purchases made through App Store. Now, app developers and consumers in African markets, including Nigeria, Egypt, and Tanzania, would be impacted. That is, of course, by the price changes as a result of that. Now, Apple mentioned the implementation of value-added tax and the rise in taxes in the affected countries as the reasons. That is for the changes, which suggests that the prices will increase, even though the company did not specify whether it would be an upward or downward adjustment. Now, the corporation claims that pricing in the impacted nations is being revised. That is to reflect recent changes in tax laws and foreign exchange rates. Now, according to Apple, Tanzania had likewise implemented an 18% VAT plus a 2% digital tax, while Egypt had instituted a 14% value-added tax, as seen as in the Nigerian business news platform, that is the Nairametrics. Now, it is important to note that all the offshore businesses that provide digital services to local clients in Nigeria are required to pay a 6% on their revenue under the terms of the 2021 Finance Act. Now, of course, applications, apps, high-frequency trading, electronic data storage, and internet advertising are all included into this. Now, I think this is also the same to what happened to Uganda, the digital taxing the social media applications, of course, which we anticipate that the burden will be lifted. That is towards the personal individuals as a result of that, because as much as most of the African countries are in an outlook, remember, we're still having issues of the COVID-19, not yet overcome them as yet. So there is need for these African nations to really raise quite huge sums of revenue. That is to make sure that they can actually invest back into the economies. And now these digital companies have been noticed as those that are potential sources of revenue. The likes of Netflix, actually, if they have not been mentioned, Netflix, talking about Google, Facebook, and so many other streaming platforms. If you can see Apple Music and all that, but you see, the impact is all coming back to the people, the final users. But now the ultimate question is, if you to compare, we getting money from these different websites, from these applications, vis-a-vis how much money Ugandans have made as a result of that. I think we have made a lot more from them as compared to we trying to get back from them.
Because there's an highlight here which clearly shows that these offshore businesses that provide digital services to local clients in Nigeria are required to pay a 6% tax on their revenue. So that clearly shows you how much, and even when you look at how Nigerians are using the e-commerce as a drive of their economy, really. Looking at the drive in the digital economy, it is something that the Nigerians have actually picked up so steadily. And most of these platforms, they have platforms, payment system platforms, they have businesses that are actually running on platforms, apps have been developed. So I think the government of Nigeria realized how much of an importance the digital space is, and why they definitely need to tax it more, because they have a lot of traffic in the digital area, internet, when it comes to internet access, and of course affordable phones. And then in the long run, you realize most of the Nigerians, by the way, having access to these iPhones, Samsung, the latest phones, because they want to have access to internet. And at times when you're doing certain businesses using the internet and of course these phones, you need a phone that can give you quite a number of options. And you realize it may come in quite a number of brands, not all brands. Maybe you can look at the Samsung, iPhone, if Sony is still releasing, I don't know. Of course there are some other Android based phones that are still also on the market in Nigeria. But obviously when you look at these particular charges when it comes to iPhone, it is something because Apple knows they have quite some good market in such countries, Tanzania as well, here in East Africa, and Egypt is one of those other countries.
Really? Yeah, they do. But anyway, let's wait and see how this is going to turn out. Hope we don't hear that at some point in life you'll have to subscribe for you to have a Google. To use Google, you have to pay a certain amount of tax. That's when you get to realize that this really concerns every individual as a result of that. Well, it's 9 minutes to the top of the hour. You're still watching Smart Men's Business, your daily Kickstarter. I'm Andrew Barigi with Joram Paul Sunko here, driving your business. But don't forget the markets on the Zabo platform, which anytime from now we will be opening. Start 92 hash is the code for you there, which will avail with a number of options where you'll be in position to buy bonds and securities with just 15,000. You get insurance. Now the markets will be opening at 8:15, running all the way to 3:15, and this is effective Monday up to Friday, apart from the weekends and the public holidays. But for this week, we had no public holiday, so it's been just a blast onto the market, and we still have today and tomorrow for you to operate these markets, regardless of your location. North, east, central, you will be in position to actually buy these bonds and securities. It's all just simple. Start to 92 hash. Of course, all you need to do maybe is to just register with your national identification number, and for you to be a part of that. Now, Zabo says, my money, my future, and also East Africa tells us, do something new. It's 2023. And now at 7 minutes to the top of the hour, let's get into the break. And when we return, we shall be taking a look at our business tips and quotes, and definitely our business trends too.